The storm had been going for 6 hours. When Owen found the fire, his shift had ended at 4:00 in the afternoon and his truck was parked 3 km back at the ranger post, but the lightning had been hitting strange, not the usual split and scatter of a mountain storm. These strikes came down in a single column like something falling rather than something striking. So Owen pulled on his waterproof jacket, grabbed his emergency pack, and went to look. What he found was not a lightning strike. The ship had come down through the tree line at an angle, snapping 100-year-old pines like dry sticks. The wreckage sat in a shallow depression in the rock, half buried in its own crashed trench. It was not large, roughly the size of a city bus, but the materials it was made from were like nothing Owen had ever seen. The hull was dark and dense with a surface that seemed to drink the beam of his torch rather than reflect it. Smoke rose from 2 split seams near the rear. The whole thing smelled of burning metal and something older, something Owen could not name, but that made the back of his neck feel tight. He tried his radio dead. The storm was sitting on the frequency like a hand pressed over a mouth. He circled the wreck twice before finding the gap. A section of hull peeled back on impact, leaving a jagged opening just wide enough to step through. Sideways, common sense told him to wait for morning, wait for signal, wait for someone with better equipment. He stepped through anyway. Inside, emergency lighting still ran. Dim red strips along the floor that gave everything the color of old blood. Owen moved carefully, watching his steps. Interior was narrow and functional, built for creatures slightly taller than a man. There were 6 seats along the walls. 5 were occupied. Owen did not look at the occupants for long. He could see enough to understand that they were large-scaled and that none had survived the impact. He kept his breathing steady and his eyes moving. He almost missed the sound. It was small, barely there beneath the groan of cooling metal and the drum of rain on the hull, a thin papery sound, like something breathing through tissue. Owen stopped and stood completely still. He heard it again, coming from the far end of the cabin, behind a panel that had buckled half open in the crash. He crossed the cabin and pulled the panel back. Behind it was a cargo shelf, a shallow, padded recess built into the wall, and lying in it, curled into a shape no bigger than a sleeping cat, was the hatchling. Owen stared. He had never seen a Dracari in person. Nobody on Earth had, outside of the official diplomatic footage that had played on every screen in the world 18 months ago, but the images had been clear enough. Dracari were large, powerful, ancient-looking, with scales like hammered metal and wingspans that could block out the sun. This one fit in the cargo shelf. It was bronze, or had been once. The scales were dull now, matte and pale at the edges, the color of old coins left in the rain. One of its wings was folded against its body normally, the other was crooked. The membrane along the trailing edge split in a jagged line that looked like it had happened before the crash. Not because of it. Its eyes were closed. One side of its face had the bright, sharp-edged scaling Owen recognized from the footage. The other side had a cloudy, milky quality over the eye that told him, even without any medical knowledge of Dracari biology, that it could not see from that side. It was the smallest living thing Owen had ever seen that looked like it should be enormous. He reached out slowly, put 2 fingers against the scales near its neck. The Skin beneath was cold, not the cold of death, but the cold of something that had been losing heat for a long time. It was still breathing barely. Owen did not think about it for very long. He unzipped his jacket, folded the inner lining into a rough nest shape, and picked the hatchling up with both hands. It weighed almost nothing. He settled it against his chest and zipped the jacket back up around it, leaving just enough of an opening near his collar that it could breathe. It stirred once when he moved it. One eye, the clear one, the gold one, opened and looked at him. Owen looked back. Later, he would not be able to explain what happened in that moment. He was a park ranger who checked fence lines and filed weather reports practical to his bones, not a man who believed in invisible threads or signs. But something in that gold eye recognized him. He could feel it not as a thought but as a fact, the way you feel temperature, something locked into place between them, quiet and permanent, like a door closing on a room that would never be empty again. The hatchling pressed one small claw against the inside of his wrist. The skin there went warm, then briefly bright with pain, then settled into a steady pulse of heat. Then it closed its eye and went still against his chest. Owen looked down at the mark on his wrist, a small, precise impression like a sigil pressed into wax. He did not know what it meant. He zipped his jacket up the rest of the way, tucked his chin down to keep the warmth in, and walked back out into the storm. He had a long way to go before morning. 3 weeks after Owen carried Riven off the mountain, the sky above his cabin turned silver. Not the silver of clouds, the silver of something enormous hovering at an altitude just low enough to be seen, but high enough to be untouchable. Owen stepped out onto the porch with his mug and looked up. Riven, who had been sleeping in a pile of Owen's spare blankets near the wood stove, pushed through the cabin door on unsteady legs and looked up too. It had grown. Not dramatically, it was still small, enough to carry under one arm, but its scales had warmed slightly from pale coin bronze to something with a little more life in it. The cloudy eye remained cloudy, the cracked wing had not healed. 2 figures descended from the silver shape. They did not use a shuttle, they simply came down, carried by some technology Owen had no name for, and landed on the dirt path in front of his cabin with the ease of people who had done this 10,000 times. They were Dracari. Full grown, the tallest one stood nearly 2 m, broad through the chest, with scales the color of dark iron and eyes like polished amber. He wore a uniform deep blue-black marked with insignia Owen did not recognize. He looked at Owen the way a judge looks at a document he has already made a decision about. "My name is Commander Sareth," the tall one said. His compact standard was clear and flat, delivered through a translation disc at his collar. "I represent the Galactic Compact Recovery Division. We are here for the hatchling." Owen looked at Sareth, then he looked at the second envoy, who was shorter and said nothing. Then he looked down at Riven, who had positioned itself directly in front of Owen's boots and was staring up at Sareth with its one good eye. "Come inside," Owen said. "I'll put on more water." They did not come inside. They stood in the path, and Sareth explained the situation with the patience of someone who considered explanation a formality. The hatchling, the one Owen had named Riven, had been aboard a Dracari Diplomatic transport that crashed during an unmapped atmospheric entry event. The adult passengers were to be recovered. The hatchling was to be assessed. Assessed, Owen repeated. Sareth's expression did not change. The hatchling was not listed among recoverable cargo. Owen felt something go very still in his chest. It was listed as cargo. It was not listed at all. Sareth paused. It is a run of its clutch. Blind in one eye, the wing membrane is damaged beyond natural repair. By Dracari biological standards, it was not viable. The transport crew made a field determination during the emergency evacuation. They left it behind on purpose. They made a field determination. Sareth repeated, "We are here to take the hatchling for formal processing. It will be assessed by compact medical staff and then." Riven moved. It did not growl, it did not hiss, it simply stepped forward 2 paces, spread both wings, the good one and the cracked one, and went absolutely rigid. Every scale on its body lifted slightly, the way a cat raises its fur, except on a Dracari hatchling it looked less like fear and more like a wall being built in real time. The air clear's throat between Riven and Sareth seemed to thicken. Both envoys stopped moving. Sareth stared at the hatchling for a long moment. Then he stepped forward slowly, reached out and took Owen's wrist. He turned it over. The mark Riven had pressed into his skin 3 weeks ago was still there. Not faded, not smoothed over, but sharp-edged and slightly luminous, like something inlaid rather than burned. Sareth looked at it for a very long time. His jaw tightened. "This is a bond scar," he said quietly. "I don't know what that means." "It means..." Sareth stopped. He let go of Owen's wrist and took a step back. He looked at the second envoy, who gave a very small, very uncomfortable nod. Sareth looked back at Riven, who had not moved and was still watching him with that single steady gold eye. "It means the separation you are about to resist is not merely emotional, it is biological. The second stage bond has not been invoked, but the first is permanent. It cannot be undone. So you can't take it." "I did not say that, but something in..." Sareth's voice had changed. The flatness was still there, the certainty was not. "I said it cannot be undone. That is different from what is legally possible under compact tribunal procedure." He straightened. "I will need to file a report. The High Council will be informed. They will not accept this." Owen looked at Riven. Riven's wings had not lowered. Its eye was still on Sareth. "You left it behind," Owen said. "You decided it wasn't worth saving, and now you're standing in front of my cabin telling me the High Council gets an opinion." He picked up his mug from the porch railing. "I'll wait for the tribunal, but Riven stays." Sareth looked at him for a moment, then at Riven. "That name," Sareth said, "you named it. Somebody had to." The commander turned and walked back up the path. The second envoy followed. They rose silently into the silver shape above, and within a minute it was gone. Owen looked down. Riven's wings had finally folded. It sat down on the dirt path and exhaled a long, slow breath that smelled faintly of warm metal. It had grown another 2 in since morning. Owen went back inside to put on more water. The orbital station smelled like recycled air and old decisions. Owen noticed that the moment the shuttle docked and the precious seals hissed open, everything on the station was functional and cold. Not cold in temperature, but cold in the way that places feel when they have never once been built for comfort. Every corridor was exactly wide enough, every light exactly bright enough, every surface exactly clean enough, nothing more. Riven noticed the smell first. It pressed closer to Owen's side as they walked, not frightened but alert, the way an animal moves when it has entered a space and immediately begun calculating the exits. 2 months had passed since Sarah's visit. In that time, Riven had grown to the size of a large dog. Its scales had deepened slightly toward a warmer bronze, and it had begun making sounds that were almost words, not quite close enough to be unsettling to anyone who was not Owen, who had stopped being unsettled by Riven roughly 3 days into their acquaintance. The tribunal chamber was large and round, with tiered seating along the curved walls. 14 delegates sat in those seats. Species Owen half recognized from compact documentation, and species he had never seen before. At the front in the primary chair sat General Drayle. He was Drackery, older than Sarath, with scales the color of weathered granite, and the kind of stillness that powerful things have when they have decided to be patient. He looked at Riven the way you look at something you have already categorized and set aside. The hatchling, Drayle said in compact standard, is a biological irregularity. Its bond to this human is the result of a stress response during a trauma event, not a genuine bond lock as recognized. Under Drackery law, we propose medical separation, after which the hatchling will be assessed for my bond, said Riven. The chamber went silent. Drayle stopped speaking. Every delegate in the room turned to look at the small bronze dragon standing beside a human park ranger in the center of the chamber floor. Riven's voice was rough and slow, and clearly costed something. The words came out like rocks being moved by hand, one at a time, but they came out. My bond, Riven said again. My choice. Hatchlings did not speak, not for months. The developmental window for first speech in Drackery young was 6 to 9 months at the earliest, and that was for large, healthy hatchlings raised in proper clutch environments with full adult support. Riven was 2 months old, undersized, half-blind, wing damaged. Drayle recovered quickly. A stress vocalization, not genuine speech. A soft sound from the far side of the chamber. One of the delegates, a small, many-limbed being with large eyes behind thick optical lenses, raised 2 of her hands. I would like to dispute that assessment, General. Her name, Owen would later learn, was Dr. Halera. She was a xenobiologist attached to the Compact Research Division, and she had the calm, precise manner of someone who had spent a very long career being ignored by people who then turned out to be wrong. She did not speak in the session. She caught Owen in the corridor outside during the recess break and spoke quickly in a low voice with the air of someone saying something they were not technically supposed to say. The hatchling is not simply a runt, she said. I have been reviewing the biological scan data from when you both boarded. What Riven is, what it appears to be, is a ghost clutch survivor. Owen did not know the term. Halera explained. In every large Drackery clutch, there was sometimes one egg that seemed wrong from the start, too small, slow to develop. The adults usually called it early or left it behind when the clutch was moved, exactly as the transport crew had done with Riven, but in rare cases, rare enough that compact researchers had fewer than 40 documented instances in 400 years of records. The weak egg survived, and when it did not simply recover, it accelerated. The ghost clutch biological framework, pushed to its limit by stress and survival, rewrote its own ceiling. I want to show you the growth projections, Halara said. She pulled a small data screen from her coat and opened a file. Owen looked at the numbers. He looked at them for a long time. That's not possible, he said, for a Dracari born that small. Under normal circumstances, no. But Riven did not develop under normal circumstances. Halara lowered the screen. If the projections hold and the early indicators suggest they will, Riven will not be the smallest Dracari anyone has ever seen. It will be one of the largest. Owen looked across the corridor to where Riven was sitting against the wall, watching him with its one gold eye. The cracked wing was folded tight. The good one twitched slightly, the way a dog's ear moves when it is tracking a sound. Does Drail know this? Owen asked. Halara's expression answered him before she did. The Dracari High Council has had access to ghost clutch research for 200 years. They have always chosen to consider the data inconclusive, because if they admitted it was real, they'd have to admit they kept abandoning dragons that would have become extraordinary. Yes, Halara said simply, that is exactly why. The recess bell sounded. Inside the chamber, the delegates were returning to their seats. Inside the chamber, General Drail was calling the vote on forced separation. It passed 7-3. Owen walked back in and stood next to Riven. Riven looked up at him, then wrapped its tail once around Owen's ankle, not tight, not restraining, just present, just there. They had 48 hours. Dr. Halara had made sure the cameras in their assigned quarters were off. Owen did not ask how. He got the impression she was the kind of person who had spent years learning exactly which rules could be bent without breaking and exactly which ones mattered. She left without explaining anything, the door sealed behind her. Owen sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, and Riven settled beside him, warm and heavy against his arm, its tail curled in a loose circle around its own feet. Outside the small viewport, the stars were very still. Owen had not spoken much since the vote. There was not a great deal to say. The decision had been made by people with authority over both of them in a room built entirely from authority, using a legal framework that did not include Owen's opinion and did not consider Riven's personhood. He had 48 hours and no plan. He was a park ranger from a mountain in a country on a planet that the Galactic Compact considered a junior member at best and a bureaucratic inconvenience at worst. Hey, he said, not loudly, just enough to fill the quiet. Riven turned its head. I want to tell you something, Owen said. I'm probably not going to get to say it later, depending on how tomorrow goes. He looked at the floor for a moment. I didn't go up that mountain because I was brave. I went because I couldn't sleep and the lightning looked wrong, and I've always been bad at leaving things alone when something feels off. He paused. When I found you in that cargo shelf, you were so small and you were trying so hard to keep breathing. Something about that it got into me. I couldn't leave you there. Riven was very still. Its gold eye caught the pale light from the viewport. I know you understood what they said in that chamber, Owen continued, about the ghost clutch, about what you might become. I don't know if that changes anything for you. I just wanted you to know that none of that is why I kept you. I kept you because you were alive. And you needed someone. Riven was quiet for a moment, then slowly and with obvious effort it began to speak. It told him things it had never tried to put into words before, because it had not had the words before, and also because there had never been a moment quiet enough to hold them. It told him what it remembered from the transport: the smell of the cargo shelf, the vibration of the engines, the sound of the adults moving toward the escape hatches. It told him it had heard someone say its egg number. It had heard the decision. It had been awake when the hatch sealed. Owen did not say anything. He listened. I knew, Riven said. Its voice was still rough, still slow, but the 2 months of near constant listening had built something, a foundation of words. It had been collecting and storing for exactly this kind of moment. When the ship fell, I knew I would not be found. Things that are left behind are not found. That is the rule. That's not a rule, Owen said quietly. It was my rule, Riven said, until you. Owen looked at the mark on his wrist. The bonding scar. Did you choose me, or did it just happen because I was the first warm thing you found? Riven looked at him for a long time, so long that Owen thought it might not answer. Then you chose me first. Owen exhaled slowly. Riven extended one small claw and pressed it against the bonding scar on Owen's wrist. The metal warm heat came. Again, the same heat as the mountain, but slower now, deeper, not the reflex of a frightened hatchling, but something deliberate, intentional. Riven held it there and looked at Owen with both eyes. The gold one bright, the cloudy one still and steady in its own way, and spoke 2 sentences with the absolute seriousness of something that has decided fully and without reservation. I am not making a promise because I am afraid. I am making it because I want to. You will not be alone again, and nothing will touch you while I breathe. This is not instinct, this is me. The cracked wing moved. Owen turned to look at it, the membrane, the split jagged tear along the trailing edge that the compact doctors had listed as permanent damage, was lit from within. Faint veins of light traced every line of the structure, branching and returning like a system of rivers. Seen from very high up, it did not heal immediately, but it pulsed steadily like something waking after a long sleep. Owen had no way of knowing that. 2 decks up, Dr. Halera had broken her own rule about the cameras and was watching the bioscan data with her many hands pressed flat against the desk, absolutely motionless. He just sat on the floor with a dragon pressed against his arm in a room on a station far from his mountain, and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the space around him was not empty. Morning was coming. He would deal with morning when it arrived. The guards who came for Riven at dawn were not ready for what they found. They had been briefed on the hatchling. They had the measurements from 2 days ago, roughly the size of a large dog. 1 damaged wing, partial blindness. The left eye, limited vocalizations. They had tranquilizer canisters calibrated for that size. They had a containment carrier designed for that. Wait. What opened the door when they knocked was not that. Riven stood at the threshold and looked down at them. In the night, the ghost clutch event had fully triggered. Riven now stood at the height of Owen's shoulder, and Owen was Not a short man, the copper bronze. Scales had deepened overnight too. Something richer, a warm hammered gold. Brown that caught the corridor light and held it. Both wings were folded along its back. Both, the cracked wing had sealed completely, every vein refused. Along the membrane, the trailing edge, smooth and unbroken, the cloudy eye was still cloudy, that had not changed. But it was open, and it was watching the guards with an attention that made two of them step back without deciding to. Owen stood behind Riven with his arms at his sides. General Drayle arrived 12 minutes later with a full security detail, 8 officers, 2 of them in heavy equipment. He stopped in the corridor and looked at Riven with the expression of a man whose document does not match the situation in front of him. "Step aside," Drayle said to Riven. "No," said Riven. It was not a growl, it was not a threat display, it was just a word delivered in the same flat, clear, compact standard that Drayle himself used, and it sat in the corridor like something placed there permanently. Drayle looked at Owen. "Instruct your animal to comply." "Riven is not my animal," Owen said, "and I'm not going to instruct it to do anything it doesn't want to do." Drayle's eyes moved back to Riven. "This station operates under compact authority. That authority supersedes any bond claim you." "I know what it supersedes," Riven said. "Say what you mean." "You want to take me because a tribunal decided I was property, not a person. You want Owen to stand aside because you have decided he has no standing here." It lowered its head slightly, not in submission, but in the way something large gets very precise about where it is looking. "I am telling you clearly in the language of the station, using words and not instinct. I will not go. He will not be touched. These are not threats, they are facts." Drayle raised one hand. 3 of the security officers raised their equipment. Owen stepped forward, not in front of Riven, beside it. He looked past Drayle to the corridor behind him, where he could see the station's internal broadcast panel. Up, Halara had done that too, he realized. He did not know when or how, but every screen in that corridor was live, and he could see the reflection of his own face in the nearest panel, which meant every delegate on the station could see this corridor right now. He spoke to the screens, not to Drayle. 2 months ago, the Drackery transport crew made a decision, he said. They looked at the smallest hatchling in the clutch, and they decided it wasn't worth the effort. Too small, too damaged, not viable, so they sealed the hatch and left it behind. He did not raise his voice. There was no need to raise it. Then one human, no weapons, no rank, no authority, went up a mountain in a storm because the lightning looked wrong, and he found something alive in the wreck that everyone else had already given up on. He picked it up and put it in his jacket and carried it home. Owen paused. Look at Riven right now. Look at what a single decision to not walk away produced, and then ask yourselves who in this situation made the better call. The corridor was very quiet. Commander Sarath had been standing at the far edge of the security detail the entire time. He had said nothing. Now he stepped forward past Drayle and held up one hand. Lower your equipment, he said. His voice carried the specific weight of someone who does not need to repeat themselves. Drayle turned on him. Sarath, there is a legal mechanism. Sarath's tone did not change. Article 41 of the Drackery Accord, subsection 7. A bond Vow spoken in second stage cannot be enforced against under compact law. Without the bonded dragon's voluntary compliance, he looked at Riven. Dragon has made its position clear. The separation order cannot be executed without violating the accord. He looked at Drail with the patience of someone who had been waiting a very long time to say something. You knew this, General. You scheduled the separation before the second stay. Vow could be entered into the record. Dr. Halera filed it this morning at approximately 4:00 in the morning while you were sleeping. Drail said nothing. Lower your equipment, Sarath said. Again, and this time it was not a request. The security detail stood down. Drail left the corridor without another word. His footsteps were the only sound until they faded. Owen let out a breath. Riven's wing came up slowly, gently, and curved over Owen's shoulder. Not a threat display, not a territorial claim, just weight. Warmth, the particular comfort of something large deciding you are worth covering. They walked out of the corridor together. The station watched them go. 6 months later, the mountain looked exactly the same. That was the thing Owen kept coming back to when he thought about everything that had changed. The North Ridge was still the North Ridge. The tree line still ended at the same elevation. The ranger post still had a broken latch on the supply cabinet that he kept meaning to fix. The world had not rearranged itself to reflect the fact that Owen's life was now fundamentally different in almost every way. It had simply continued indifferent and solid, which he found quietly reassuring. The cabin had been expanded, not by Owen. The compact had sent a construction crew as part of the formal bond recognition agreement, which was itself a document 17 pages long that Owen had signed in 3 places and understood in roughly half. The addition was large enough for Riven, which meant it was very large. The original cabin now functioned as Owen's personal space. The addition was Riven's. The wall between them had a door that was always open. Riven was not in the addition when the compact diplomat arrived. Riven was outside, circling the peak, the specific peak above the crash site, in slow, wide loops from the ground. Against the pale morning sky, it was an extraordinary thing to watch. The copper-gold scales caught the light at the top of each loop and held it for a moment before the turn, so that there was a brief repeating flash of something bright over the mountain. Owen had watched it enough times that he no longer stopped what he was doing when it happened. He had not yet decided if that meant he had become used to it or if he had simply accepted that some things did not need to be paused for. They could just exist alongside everything else. The diplomat's name was Yeva. She was young for a compact official. Owen guessed late 20s by human reckoning, though with her species he was aware that was likely meaningless. She had a careful, precise manner and a recording device she placed on the table between them like a peace offering. This is for the Galactic Compact Bond Registry, she said, the first entry of its kind. We want to document it accurately. Owen nodded. He made 2 mugs and set one in front of her. Yeva looked at her notes. Can you describe for the record what you felt when you first found the hatchling on the mountain? What made you bring it with you? Owen thought about it. He took his time. He had learned over the past 6 months that the people who came to ask him About Riven we're usually looking for something large and meaningful, and that the honest answer was always smaller and simpler than what they wanted, and that the honest answer was better anyway. It was cold, he said. The hatchling was cold and it was trying to breathe. And it fit in my jacket pocket. He looked at his mug. I just didn't want it to die alone on that mountain. Yeva wrote something down, and the bond, when did you understand what it meant? Gradually, Owen said. Riven explained. Most of it, Sarath filled in the technical parts. Dr. Halera sent me 3 research papers that I only partly understood. He paused. I think I understood what it actually meant the night before the separation order was supposed to be carried out, when Riven told me the promise was an instinct, that it was a choice. What did Riven say exactly, if you remember? Owen remembered exactly. He had replayed it enough times that the words had worn smooth grooves in his memory, the way river smooths a stone over many years. It said the smallest promise kept without breaking is heavier than any oath made in front of a crowd. Yeva looked up from her notes. Riven said that. Yes, so. She was quiet for a moment, then she looked out the window at the mountain, at the slow, wide loops of copper gold, against the morning sky, at the brief, bright flash at the top of each turn. It's so much larger now, she said, not as an official observation, just as a fact she was processing. It keeps growing, Owen said. Halera says it'll level off eventually, maybe. He did not sound particularly concerned about this. Yeva turned back to him. She had one more official question. He could see it in the way she straightened slightly, the way her recording device light blinked. For the record, how would you categorize the bond? There is no existing compact framework that I wouldn't categorize it, Owen said. It's just what it is. Yeva nodded slowly and wrote that down. 2. Outside, Riven completed another loop and angled lower, dropping in a long, unhurried arc toward the ridge above the cabin. It landed on the high point of the rock, the same rock Owen had climbed the night of the storm, and folded its wings and sat watching the mountain. Below it, Owen's cabin. Below that, the small figure of a human park range of visible through the window. The formal entry in the Galactic Compact Bond Registry file that afternoon contained all the technical data, measurements, dates, biological metrics, legal rulings. At the bottom, in the section marked Bonded Dragon Statement, Riven had dictated 12 words directly to the compact system. Bond status permanent. Reason he chose me first, I chose him. Second, everything after that is just detail.